So I want to start by throwing out a really wild hypothetical for you today. What if the absolute bleeding edge of modern astrophysics, and I mean like the mind-bending quantum mechanics and cosmology that we are just barely figuring out today with these multi-billion-dollar machines, what if all of that was already mapped out thousands of years ago?
Right, by ancient sages sitting in deep meditation with their eyes completely closed.
Exactly. It sounds crazy, right?
Yeah.
But it's a premise that completely forces a reevaluation of how we, assume knowledge is even acquired. We're so heavily conditioned to believe that you need telescopes and particle accelerators to understand the cosmos.
Yeah, there's this massive assumption that the universe is just this object out there, something to be measured and quantified, completely separate from us as observers.
Right, the whole materialistic assumption.
Yeah.
But then you look at the stack of source material we're diving into today, and that assumption just hits a total brick wall.
It really does. The synthesis in these notes is pretty staggering.
It is. For this deep dive, we have this incredible cross-referencing going on. On one side, we've got the foundational equations of Albert Einstein, Stephen Hawking's theories on black holes, and literally the latest data from the James Webb Space Telescope.
And on the other side,
It's directly compared against ancient Hindu philosophy. We're talking Vedanta, the Upanishads, and the recorded histories of Indian mystics. And the central thesis here, which is really what hooked me, is that science and spirituality aren't opposing forces.
right, they aren't even just vaguely parallel lines that never touch.
Exactly. They are just two entirely different languages describing the exact same underlying cosmic mechanics.
Which really brings us to the core mission of today's deep dive.
Yeah.
You're going to examine the evidence in these sources to see if we can actually bridge that gap between theoretical physics and spiritual enlightenment.
Yeah, because we aren't here to declare a winner between, the laboratory and the ashram.
No, not at all. Our goal for you today is to extract the functional mechanical overlaps. We want to see if we, in the 21st century, are basically just using complex math to rediscover an anatomical map of the universe that was drawn millennia ago.
So to really test that thesis, I feel like we need to start big, like the violent mechanics of the cosmos. The source material basically asks how ancient mystics could possibly know the functional mechanics of black holes centuries before the telescope was even invented.
It's a huge question. Let's start with the life cycle of a star, right?
Yeah, let's unpack that.
Yeah.
In astrophysics, a star isn't just a burning ball of fire. It's actually this incredibly delicate balancing act. You have nuclear fusion in the core, pushing energy outward, and then the immense gravity of the star's own mass pushing inward.
Right. It's what physicists call hydrostatic equilibrium.
Exactly. But eventually, a massive star burns through its hydrogen and its helium all the way up the periodic table to iron. And fusing iron doesn't produce energy. It actually absorbs it.
So that outward pressure just stops.
Bam. Gravity instantly wins. The core collapses in like a fraction of a second. The outer layers rebound in this massive supernova. And what's left behind is an object so dense that the escape velocity is faster than the speed of light.
A black hole, the ultimate endpoint of localized matter.
Right. And then physics theorizes the mathematical inverse of this process, right? The white hole.
Oh, yeah. So if a black hole is a region of space-time that nothing can escape, a white hole is theoretically a region of space-time that nothing can enter. It's a point of absolute intense emission.
Just bursting matter and light outward into existence.
Exactly. And mathematically, that functions very similarly to the Big Bang itself.
Okay, so that is the cutting-edge theoretical physics side of the coin. But the text matches this perfectly against this really fascinating historical conversation from the year 1885.
This is the one between the mystic Swami Vivekananda and his guru, Sri Ramakrishna, right?
Yeah. So Vivekananda comes out of this state of really deep meditation and describes a vision. But he didn't just see like a generic light. He specifically described a blinding white light from which countless universes were actively being birthed and projected outward.
And when Ramakrishna heard this, he identified it immediately using his tradition's terminology. He called it the Brahmayoni.
Right, the cosmic womb, essentially.
Yes. And he described it not as some static light, but as a dynamic, triangle-shaped origin point, a cosmic engine that is constantly pulling in decaying universes and pushing out new ones.
A system that breathes, like exhaling galaxies and inhaling them. But okay, let's pause here because I want to look critically at the translation of these texts. The notes point out that Ramakrishna also called the cosmos the goddess's cosmic jewels, or the Vaira Vedorium.
He described millions of multicolored diamonds and gems scattered across the void.
Right. And if we are looking for rigorous scientific overlaps here, calling stars jewels it sounds like really beautiful poetry. But it doesn't sound like astrophysics. It sounds purely like a religious metaphor.
Well, it sounds like poetry until you apply the lens of stellar spectroscopy.
Hey, really? How so?
Think about what a star actually looks like when you measure its thermal radiation. We know today, through black body radiation principles, that stars emit different wavelengths of light, different colors, essentially based entirely on their surface temperatures.
Oh, right, which correlates with their age and mass.
Exactly. So a young, incredibly hot, massive star, like a blue supergiant, burns at temperatures exceeding 30,000 Kelvin. It emits this piercing sapphire blue or stark white light.
Wow, okay.
Conversely, an ancient, dying star 1 that has expanded into a red giant, it cools down to maybe 3,000 Kelvin. So it emits a deep ruby red glow.
So you literally have sapphire blue young stars and ruby red old stars out there.
Yes. If human consciousness could somehow perceive the cosmos without our atmospheric distortion, if you could perceive the varying thermal outputs of billions of stars, the visual result would literally be a vast scattering of multicolored glowing jewels.
That is wild.
The language they used in 1885 wasn't mathematical, sure, but the observational data, the physical reality of what was being described, was highly accurate.
But the text doesn't just stop at describing what the sky looks like. Ramakrishna actually warned his students not to get mesmerized by the jewels, but to seek out the mechanism that creates and destroys them.
And this is where the text makes that incredible leap. It links the macromechanics of black holes and white holes to the microscopic topology of the human subtle body.
The chakras. And I really want to clarify for you listening right now, we aren't talking about chakras in the modernized, generalized wellness retreat sense.
Right, no, the source material treats them as an exact energetic anatomy. It relies on this foundational Vedic axiom, yat pinde tat brahmande.
Meaning, what is in the macrocosm is in the microcosm.
Exactly. The premise is that the architecture of the entire universe is structurally identical to the microcosm of the human system. It's a fractal view of reality.
So if the universe has a gravitational singularity that absorbs and terminates stuff, and an inverse singularity that births it, the human body has to have those exact same mechanisms.
Functionally, yes. And the text maps this out explicitly.
It aligns the black hole with the Muladhara, right? The base chakra at the bottom of the spine.
Yes. In the spiritual texts, the Muladhara is the point of ultimate contraction. It's where energy, time, and physical attachment compress and essentially die. It is the literal gravitational well of worldly material existence.
And on the exact opposite end, you have the white hole,
which is mapped to the Sahasrara, or the crown chakra at the top of the head. This is described as the point of explosive expansion. It's where new energy, spiritual birth, and ultimate liberation radiate outward.
Look at the functional implications of that mapping, though. The natural entropy of human life, like the accumulation of attachments, physical decay, the inevitable collapse into death. It's all energy moving downward, right? Trapped in the gravitational pull of the Muladhara.
Yes, a normal human life basically falls into the black hole.
But the entire mechanics of advanced yogic meditation are designed to reverse that trajectory. The yogi is actively trying to generate enough internal escape velocity to pull their consciousness out of that base gravitational well and push it upward toward the Sahasrara, toward the white hole.
You're escaping the event horizon of your own material existence to reach expansion.
Which totally reframes the purpose of meditation. It goes from just relaxation to, applied internal physics.
It really does.
But, okay, if we follow this logic, it brings up a massive structural problem. Because if the Muladhara is a black hole, the point of ultimate contraction, what happens at the absolute center of it, in modern cosmology, the center of a black hole is where our entire framework of understanding completely falls apart.
You are referring to the singularity, the point where the mass of a collapsed star is compressed into an infinitesimally small volume.
Right. And for those listening, the singularity isn't just some dense ball of matter. It's a mathematical crisis for physics. Einstein's general relativity dictates that at the singularity, the gravitational field becomes infinitely strong. The curvature of space-time becomes infinite.
Right, which works fine for the macroscopic universe.
But when you move to quantum mechanics, which governs the tiny stuff, absolute infinity is just impossible. Quantum mechanics demands fluctuation, measurement, localized probabilities.
Yeah.
So the two most successful theories in the history of science violently contradict each other right at the center of a black hole.
Because the math literally breaks. Think about it. When you take the density of a collapsing star and divide it by a volume that has shrunk to absolute zero, your result is infinity.
You can't divide by zero.
Exactly. In physics, when an equation outputs infinity, it is generally accepted as a sign that your theory is fundamentally flawed. The metric tensor, the tool physicists use to measure the geometry of space-time, it just blows up. Space and time cease to exist.
So science looks at the singularity and sees a terrifying void, just this breakdown of natural law.
But the source texts offer this fascinating epistemological pivot here. They address this exact concept of the infinite zero, but they use the Isha Upanishad to do it.
Oh, the concept of Purnam.
Yes, Purnam translates to absolute wholeness or complete infinity. And the Upanishads lay out this ancient philosophical equation for this state. Infinity added to infinity results in infinity. Infinity subtracted from infinity leaves infinity.
Now, at first glance, a modern mathematician might just roll their eyes and dismiss that as semantic wordplay.
They might. But you have to look at how applying the concept of Purnam actually resolves the deadlock of the singularity. Science views the singularity as a broken machine because the laws of physics stop working. But the Vedanta perspective argues something totally different.
Right. It argues that the laws of physics don't work at the singularity because the singularity is the underlying fabric from which those laws emerge in the first place.
Exactly. It's the source code.
You can't use the rules of the software to measure the hardware that's running it. That's a great way to put it.
The metric of space-time breaks down because Purnam, the singularity, is fundamentally non-metric. It is unmanifested pure potential. In the spiritual texts, reaching the state is called achieving the no-mind state.
So when a sage achieves ultimate realization, their ego, their whole mechanism for measuring and dividing reality into this and that, it just collapses to zero.
They effectively become the singularity. But here is the crucial difference. They do not report experiencing a terrifying void of nothingness. They report an expansion into absolute wholeness.
So the physicist's nightmare is literally the mystic's ultimate goal. The physicist is terrified because their ruler melted, but the mystic is thrilled because they've realized they don't need the ruler anymore.
That's a perfect analogy.
But let's ground this back into the physical stuff of the universe. If the singularity represents this non-metric Purnam, what actually happens to the physical matter? Say a black hole swallows a planet, or a star, or just a cloud of dust. All those atoms cross the event horizon. Do they just cease to exist?
Does the physical data of the universe just vanish into Purnam?
Yeah, because that question leads us directly into Stephen Hawking's most famous paradox.
The black hole information paradox. It is arguably the most significant theoretical battleground in modern physics.
Let's break down why it's such a crisis. So, Stephen Hawking proved mathematically that black holes are not eternally permanent traps. Because of quantum fluctuations near the edge of the black hole, they emit a tiny amount of thermal radiation, right? Hawking radiation.
Right. And over an unimaginably long timescale, trillions of years, a black hole will literally evaporate and disappear completely.
But here is the massive problem. A fundamental tenet of quantum mechanics is that information can never be destroyed. The specific quantum state that makes a carbon atom different from an oxygen atom, that data must be conserved in the universe.
So if a black hole swallows an entire solar system and then eventually evaporates into random, featureless thermal radiation, where did the information of that solar system go?
Exactly. If the information is truly destroyed, it implies that the fundamental laws of quantum mechanics are just wrong.
It would mean the universe is non-deterministic. You could not theoretically reconstruct the past from the present. The entire fabric of cause and effect would be completely unraveled.
Which physicists obviously cannot accept. So we get to the proposed solution from physicists like Leonard Susskind, which is called the holographic principle. And how the sources correlate this modern physics theory to ancient texts is just staggering to me.
It really is. Susskind theorized that when a three-dimensional object, let's say a planet, falls into a black hole, its physical 3D structure is indeed torn apart. However, the fundamental quantum information of that planet is not sucked into the singularity and deleted.
Right.
Instead, it gets smeared and encoded onto the two-dimensional surface boundary of the black hole, the event horizon.
The implication there is profound. It suggests that all the 3D volumetric info of an object can be perfectly conserved mathematically on a 2D surface. Now, we usually hear this explained like a computer hard drive, like you smash the monitor, but the data is saved on the drive.
Right, but I don't think that does the physics justice.
I agree. A better way to understand the holographic principle is to look at an actual optical hologram. Think of like a security sticker on a credit card. It is a completely flat 2D piece of plastic. But because of how the light interference patterns are etched into it, when you shine a light on it, it projects a fully 3D image.
The 2D surface contains all the mathematical coordinates required to construct the 3D volume.
Exactly. Susskind is saying the edge of the black hole is the 2D plastic sticker, holding the data of everything that ever fell into it.
And this brings us to the breathtaking parallel in the source texts. The ancient equivalent to this two-dimensional boundary of encoded information is the concept of the Akashic records, or the Akasha, operating through what is called the Karana Sarira, the causal body.
Let's trace that overlap, because it's wild. In Hindu cosmology, the universe goes through cycles. At the end of a cosmic cycle, there was this massive dissolution called a Mahapralaya. Everything physical is utterly destroyed.
The 3D physical universe essentially ceases to exist.
Right. But the texts emphatically state that the karma, the accumulated actions, desires, and fundamental structural data of all entities is not destroyed. It is conserved in a subtle, non-physical field known as the Akashic records.
And karma, in this specific philosophical context, is the exact equivalent of quantum information. It is the deterministic data that dictates the state of a system.
So when a human body dies, which is like the microcosm of the Mahapralaya, the 3D biological form decays. But the text argues that the Karana Sarira, the causal body containing the karmic data, is preserved in the localized Akashic field.
Exactly. So the event horizon of a black hole mathematically storing 2D quantum information operates functionally identically to the Akashic field storing karmic data after physical dissolution.
The physical form is lost, but the blueprint is saved.
Precisely. And what does the universe do with that saved data? The source texts utilize the metaphor of a cosmic projector.
Right. Following the dissolution, when the cycle restarts, what cosmology would call the next Big Bang or white hole expansion, that saved 2D karmic data is reactivated.
The raw, undifferentiated energy of creation acts as the light source of a projector. It shines through the 2D Akashic records, casting a highly complex, interactive 3D holographic projection.
And that projection is the physical universe we are walking around in right now. We are living inside the holographic output of the Akashic records. It's just a stunning model of reality.
It is, but treating the physical universe as a holographic projection of data forces us to confront arguably the most difficult question in all of human inquiry.
Oh, right. Because if the universe is a sophisticated simulation of karmic data, who is sitting in the theater?
Exactly. How is the simulation being experienced? How do biological networks of carbon, water, and electricity possess the capacity to act as an observer?
You are outlining the hard problem of consciousness, which was famously coined by the philosopher David Chalmers. It really represents the absolute boundary of materialistic science.
It's the divide between the objective and the subjective. Neuroscience is incredibly adept at mapping the objective mechanics of the brain, right? We can put a subject in an fMRI machine and watch the exact neural pathways light up when they say, bite into a lemon.
We can map the chemical cascade of serotonin and dopamine.
Right. But no matter how detailed that mechanical map gets, it completely fails to explain qualia. It cannot explain the internal subjective feeling of sourness or the subjective experience of joy. We can explain the processing of data, but we cannot explain the experience of data.
Because the prevailing scientific paradigm operates under the assumption of emergence. The assumption is that if you network enough non-conscious matter together, like billions of neurons firing across trillions of synapses, consciousness will eventually just spontaneously emerge as a byproduct of that complexity.
Yeah, that's the standard view.
But I want to play devil's advocate and challenge the source text here, because the emergence theory makes logical sense to our everyday observations. Think about chemistry. If I take hydrogen, a gas, and oxygen, another gas, and I bind them together, I get water.
And water has the property of wetness?
Right. Neither hydrogen nor oxygen possesses wetness on their own. The property emerges strictly from their complex combination. So why is it so unreasonable for science to assume that consciousness is simply the wetness that emerges from a highly complex combination of brain cells?
It is a reasonable assumption until you scrutinize the nature of what is actually emerging. The source material, aligning with the pioneers of quantum mechanics, argues that comparing consciousness to a chemical property is a fundamental category error.
How so?
Well, wetness is still an objective physical property that can be measured externally. Consciousness is the foundation of measurement itself. Let's use a different lens. Consider a highly advanced digital camera connected to an AI image processor.
Okay.
You pointed at a sunset. The processor analyzes the wavelengths of light, identifies the specific nanometer frequency of the color red, and mathematically catalogs the gradient of the light. It processes the visual data millions of times faster and more accurately than a human optic nerve ever could.
But the AI does not experience the profound subjective awe of the sunset.
Exactly. Processing information is fundamentally completely different from experiencing information.
Ah, I see. This is where the paradigm shift occurs in the texts. The ancient model asserts that the brain does not generate consciousness any more than a glass prism generates the colors of the rainbow.
Oh, that is a fantastic way to look at it. Let's explore that prism analogy. If you shine pure white light through a glass prism, the glass refracts the light, bending it into a localized spectrum of red, blue, green, and so on.
Right. And if you only ever studied the prism, you might conclude that the glass itself is chemically manufacturing the colors.
But the glass is merely filtering and restricting a pre-existing unified light source. According to the synthesis of these spiritual texts and the underlying philosophy of quantum mechanics, consciousness is the fundamental white light of the universe.
It is a non-local universal field, much like electromagnetism or gravity.
Yes, your biological brain is just the prism. It takes the infinite non-local field of universal consciousness and filters it, restricting it down into a highly localized, ego-driven human experience.
So the brain isn't a consciousness factory, it's a consciousness receiver and filter, like a radio tuning into Wi-Fi. And what's wild is this isn't just ancient mysticism. This aligns with the philosophical conclusions of the very physicists who built quantum mechanics.
Max Planck, the originator of quantum theory, explicitly stated that consciousness was fundamental and that matter was derivative of consciousness.
Erwin Schrödinger echoed the exact same sentiment. They realized that you cannot formulate a theory of everything by starting with dead matter and hoping it eventually wakes up. You have to start with consciousness as the bedrock geometry of reality.
And if consciousness is a fundamental non-local field that exists prior to physical matter, it profoundly alters our relationship to another fundamental metric, time.
Oh, yeah. Because if our consciousness is not generated by the biological ticking of our physical brain, then our true nature is not bound by linear time. The source text provides this really fascinating biological illustration of this concept using cryopreservation.
The cryopreserved sperm cell, it's an incredible biological proof of concept.
It really is. In modern reproductive medicine, a human sperm cell can be submerged in liquid nitrogen at negative 196 degrees Celsius.
Yeah.
At that extreme temperature, molecular motion effectively halts. The biological clock of that cell is paused.
Linear time as a functional metric completely ceases to apply to it. It exists in a state of suspended animation.
But consider the monumental amount of data contained within that timeless suspension. That's the mind-bending part. Inside the DNA of that frozen cell is the accumulated biological karma of millions of years of evolutionary history. It holds the past.
And simultaneously, it holds the precise architectural blueprint for a complex human being that does not yet exist. It holds the future.
Past and future are perfectly compressed into a single frozen present. Time, for that cell, is completely illusory until the exact moment it is thawed and conception occurs, at which point the linear sequence of biological time starts running.
It serves as a biological microcosm for the nature of universal consciousness. We tend to view time as an external river that is relentlessly carrying us forward from birth to death. But the text suggests that time is not an external container that we exist inside of.
Right. Instead, linear time is a localized construct that exists within our filtered consciousness. We are the ones generating the sequence of time by observing it.
Exactly. When the prism of the brain is active, we experience reality as a sequence of events. But the fundamental white light, the universal consciousness, exists outside of that sequence. It originates from the timeless pornum.
And in this realization bridges so beautifully into how we perceive the macroscopic universe. Because if human consciousness is merely a localized refraction of a vast universal consciousness, it drastically changes how we should interpret the physical structure of the cosmos, particularly the massive, overwhelming emptiness of it.
Which brings us to the invisible 95% of reality, the dark universe. Let's ground this in the astrophysics first, because the science here is staggering on its own.
Yeah, let's lay out those stats. When astronomers look out into the universe, everything we can see, every glowing star, every planet, every swirling nebula, every single atom of normal baryonic matter, that all accounts for roughly 5% of the total mass energy content of the universe.
Only 5%. The other 95% of the cosmos is completely invisible and undetectable by our instruments.
And this wasn't just a small mathematical error. It was an observational crisis born from studying galactic rotation curves. In the 1970s, astronomers like Vera Rubin were measuring the speed at which stars orbit the center of spiral galaxies.
Right, and based on the amount of visible matter in the galaxy, the stars on the outer edges should have been orbiting much slower than the stars near the dense center.
Like how Neptune orbits our sun much slower than Mercury does.
Exactly. But that isn't what the data showed. The stars on the outer edges were moving incredibly fast. So fast that, given the visible mass of the galaxy, the centrifugal force should have flung them completely out into deep space. The galaxies literally should have ripped themselves apart.
So the only explanation was that there had to be a massive, invisible halo of matter surrounding the galaxy, providing the immense gravitational glue required to hold it together.
Yes. This became known as dark matter, making up about 27% of the universe.
And then in the late 1990s, another crisis hit. By measuring the redshift of distant supernovae, astronomers realized that the expansion of the universe wasn't slowing down due to gravity, like everyone expected. It was actively accelerating.
Some mysterious, omnipresent, repulsive force was stretching the very fabric of space-time apart, pushing galaxies away from each other at ever-increasing speeds.
And they termed this dark energy, accounting for a massive 68% of the universe. So we have dark matter acting as the invisible gravitational glue, and dark energy acting as the invisible repulsive expansion force. And modern science basically has no idea what either of them fundamentally are.
They are placeholders for our ignorance, but the source texts offer a profound shift in perspective here. They suggest our confusion stems from our microscopic vantage point.
Yeah, the text uses this amazing analogy. Imagine you are a single, conscious white blood cell operating inside a human vein. Your entire comprehensible universe is just a few millimeters of fluid. If you were somehow able to observe the human body growing from an infant into an adult, that process would not look like organic growth to you. From your hyper-localized perspective, it would appear to be a violent, inexplicable, hyper-accelerated Big Bang expansion. You would have no concept of the biological imperatives driving the skeleton to elongate.
So in this analogy, we are the confused blood cell.
Exactly. We're measuring a 13.8 billion-year cosmic expansion from an infinitesimally small rock in a totally insignificant solar system. We're looking at a localized sliver of time and panicking because everything seems to be flying apart.
But if you elevate your consciousness to the macrocosm, if you view the universe not as a collection of dead rocks, but as a cohesive, integrated entity, the expansion changes character completely.
What modern cosmology views as a cold, mechanical expansion driven by an unknown dark energy, the ancient texts view as the slow, rhythmic, organic growth of a living cosmic entity.
It is cosmic respiration, the Vishwarupa, the cosmic giant.
And the notes actually correlate the physics of the dark universe to an anatomical map of this cosmic giant, which is wild. If the 5% of visible matter, the stars and galaxies, make up the physical skeletal structure of the universe, the text maps dark matter to the cosmic connective tissue.
Just as fascia and muscle invisibly bind our physical bones together to maintain structure, dark matter is the invisible, subtle body tissue holding the galactic skeleton intact.
And dark energy, the force driving the expansion, is explicitly correlated to prana. Prana is the fundamental universal life force. It is the inherent biological imperative to grow. Think of a tiny acorn buried in the dirt.
The physical matter of the seed is small, but the prana within it exerts immense, relentless force, right?
Pushing physical matter out of the way to violently expand into a massive oak tree. Dark energy is the pranic growth impulse of the Vishwarupa, driving the cosmic body to mature.
It's an incredibly beautiful synthesis. Science looks out and sees a terrifyingly empty, dead machine that is mysteriously tearing itself apart. The ancient sages looked out and saw a living, breathing, cosmic organism stretching its limbs.
But, attributing a biological organic framework to the entire universe leads us to a pretty difficult inevitability. Biological organisms grow, yes, but they also decay. They age. And this process is stubbornly unidirectional. You never see an oak tree ungrow back into an acorn.
Which brings us to the fundamental mystery of the arrow of time. Why does the universe only run forward?
This is where the divergence between theoretical physics and observable reality becomes so stark. In the pure mathematics of physics, fundamental equations are overwhelmingly time-symmetric. They exhibit what is known as T-symmetry.
Meaning, whether you run a Newtonian equation for planetary orbits forward or backward, the math holds up perfectly. At the quantum level, particle interactions generally do not distinguish between past and future.
The equations are completely blind to the direction of time. But our actual physical reality is definitely not. If I knock my coffee mug off this desk right now, it shatters into 100 pieces on the floor. I can sit here for the rest of eternity, and those ceramic shards will never spontaneously organize themselves, leap off the floor, and reassemble into a perfect mug.
The arrow of time always points toward the shattered mug. And physics blames this on entropy, specifically the second law of thermodynamics.
Right. Entropy is technically a measure of the number of specific ways a thermodynamic system may be arranged, which we commonly understand as a measure of disorder or randomness.
And the second law dictates that in an isolated system, entropy can only stay the same or increase. It can never decrease. There are vastly more ways for a mug to be shattered than for it to be whole. Therefore, the universe overwhelmingly statistically favors disorder.
So the arrow of time is fundamentally just the arrow of entropy. We perceive time moving forward because we are observing the universe decaying. We are basically watching the grand clock wind down.
But the spiritual perspective in these sources rejects the idea that this linear decay is the ultimate truth of the cosmos. They argue that time is not a linear arrow fired into an eventual heat death. It is a circle. This is the concept of the yugas.
Vast, repeating cyclical epochs of creation, preservation, and dissolution. The universe isn't a single arrow, it's an infinite loop. It's like watching a movie. When the movie ends, you don't painstakingly rewind the film frame by frame to get back to the start. You just thread the projector again and hit restart.
But the text proposes something far more radical than just a cosmic reboot at the end of a cycle. It suggests that highly realized consciousness can actually defy entropy and manipulate the arrow of time locally.
And it uses the recorded histories of ancient Tamil saints to illustrate this localized time reversal. These accounts are usually categorized purely as religious miracles, but when you analyze them through the lens of the holographic principle and information theory that we discussed earlier, they become descriptions of localized physics manipulation.
Let's examine the first case study from the notes. The Saint Thurayana Sambandar. The historical account states that a young girl named Pumpavai died from a snakebite. Her physical body was cremated, and her ashes and bone fragments were collected and stored in a pot.
Right.
Years pass. Sambandar arrives, sings a highly specific, vibratory sacred hymn, and Pumpavai is resurrected. She literally steps out of the pot of ashes fully alive and physically whole.
If we strip away the mythological veneer and apply the theoretical framework we've built today, what is being described is a massive, localized reversal of entropy, a phenomenon of extreme digentropy. Break down how that works functionally.
Recall the concept of the Akashic records and the holographic principle. When Pumpavai died and her body was subjected to the extreme heat of cremation, her physical, three-dimensional matter experienced maximum entropy. The organized biological structure was completely randomized into ash.
But her quantum information, her karmic blueprint, the 2D holographic data, was perfectly preserved in the localized Akashic field.
Exactly. The text implies that a saint like Sambandar, operating from the no-mind state, is merged with the universal consciousness. He is no longer restricted by the localized arrow of time.
Because he's operating from the projector room, not staring at the screen.
Yes. The implication is that he was able to access the Akashic blueprint, the saved data, and apply a highly localized nagentropic force within the spatial confines of the ash pot. He functionally reversed the thermodynamic arrow in that specific area, using the 2D information to mathematically reorganize the randomized carbon and calcium of the ash back into the highly ordered structure of bone, tissue, and blood.
It is a localized reversal of the holographic projection. He essentially used the cosmic backup drive to re-render the physical avatar. That's an incredible way to interpret a miracle.
And the second example pushes the manipulation of space-time even further.
The Saint Sundar. Right. So the history here is that a young boy is swallowed whole by a crocodile in a lake. Many years go by, and the lake completely dries up. Sundar arrives at the dry lake bed, sings a hymn, and the lake miraculously refills with water. The crocodile manifests, opens its jaws, and spits the boy out.
But the crucial detail, the detail that makes this a space-time anomaly rather than just a resurrection, is that the boy doesn't come out as the age he was when he was swallowed.
Right. He emerges at the exact age he would have been if he had lived normally all those years.
That detail fundamentally changes the mechanics of the event. If Sundar had simply reversed the local biological clock to the moment of death, the boy would have emerged as a young child. Instead, the text is describing the manipulation of the space-time coordinate itself.
How so? Walk me through that.
Sundar didn't rewind time. He accessed the specific coordinate in space-time where the original physical interaction occurred, the swallowing, and bridged it directly to the present coordinate. But he allowed the temporal data of the boy's biological blueprint to process the intervening years.
He accessed the saved file, but forced the biological software to run the updates for the elapsed time before remanifesting the physical form.
Exactly. He bridged two coordinates in space-time while simultaneously computing the biological passage of time.
The broader implication here is earth-shattering. It implies that normal matter, our physical bodies, our cities, the stars, are absolute slaves to linear time and thermodynamic entropy. But consciousness, in its purest universal form, is not.
If you can tune your biological prism to fully receive the universal signal, you gain administrative access to the holographic projection. You can edit the localized physical reality.
Which brings us to a profound philosophical precipice. We have painted a picture of a universe that is vastly interconnected, a living, breathing cosmic entity governed by a universal field of consciousness, where quantum data is meticulously preserved and where localized space-time can be manipulated.
It is a universe teeming with dynamic holographic processes.
Right. It's an incredibly vibrant, crowded picture of reality, which makes our actual physical observations of the universe incredibly jarring. Because if the universe is this deeply interconnected, living organism, why does it seem so agonizingly lonely?
Where is everyone else?
Exactly. We have all this space, all this time, all this consciousness, but when we look up, we see dead rocks and silence. You're outlining the core existential dread of the Fermi paradox.
Let's lay out the paradox named after physicist Enrico Fermi. The logic is simple but brutal.
The observable universe is 13.8 billion years old. It contains an estimated 2 trillion galaxies. Each galaxy contains hundreds of billions of stars, and we now know that almost every star has planets orbiting it.
Statistically, the number of habitable Earth-like planets is astronomically high. Given the billions of years available for evolution, intelligent alien life shouldn't just exist. It should be ubiquitous.
There should be Type 3 civilizations on the Kardashev scale that have harnessed the energy of entire galaxies. We should see massive Dyson spheres blocking out starlight. Our radio telescopes should be deafened by the communications of a million different alien empires.
But when we look out, nothing. Absolute silence. It's known as the Great Filter.
So are we alone, or are the scientists just looking in the wrong places?
According to the synthesis of these ancient texts, the scientific community is not merely looking in the wrong places. They are searching using a fundamentally flawed dimensional paradigm.
The text offers an excellent analogy for this.
It does. Imagine a small ant wandering across the floor of a highly advanced modern server farm. The air is thick with millions of terabytes of data flying through Wi-Fi networks and Bluetooth frequencies. The ant, using its physical biological antenna, is searching the room for chemical pheromones to communicate.
It detects nothing.
Right. From the ant's perspective, the room is completely devoid of communication.
The room is silent to the ant because the ant is looking for a chemical signal, but the room is broadcasting in digital radio frequencies.
Precisely. The ant lacks the structural capacity to interact with the existing data field. The source text argues that our modern search for extraterrestrial intelligence is operating exactly like the ant. We are pointing massive radio telescopes at the sky, desperately scanning for low-level, three-dimensional electromagnetic radio waves broadcast by biological, carbon-based entities.
We are essentially looking for ourselves. We are assuming aliens communicate exactly like a 1950s radio station.
But the ancient Hindu texts, specifically the Puranas and the epics, do not describe a localized three-dimensional universe. They describe a complex, multi-dimensional cosmic architecture consisting of 14 lokas, or planetary realms.
And these lokas are not necessarily separated by vast physical distances, but by varying dimensional frequencies and states of matter. So it's a dimensional mismatch, not a distance problem.
Yes, and the texts actually provide historical accounts of individuals interacting with these different frequencies.
Look at the Mahabharata. The warrior Arjuna engages in a journey where he physically leaves the earthly plane and travels to higher celestial realms. The text includes an incredibly specific observational detail. Arjuna describes seeing self-luminous, massive, supergient stars that were entirely invisible from the surface of the Earth.
And what makes that detail so haunting is that modern astronomy, specifically using the infrared capabilities of the James Webb Space Telescope, has only recently confirmed the existence of immense, obscured, supergent stars deep in the universe that cannot be seen with the naked eye or optical telescopes from Earth.
Arjuna was describing astrophysical anomalies thousands of years before the telescope was even invented.
And the texts explore this dimensional mismatch even further through the mechanics of astral travel. The source references a profound philosophical epic called the Yoga Vasista. It details the experiences of a queen named Leela.
Through rigorous spiritual discipline, Leela achieves the ability to decouple her consciousness from her dense physical body. Operating within her subtle, light body, she engages in what modern parapsychology might term extreme remote viewing across the cosmos.
She basically explores the galactic map without a spaceship.
Yes, and her observations directly answer the silence of the Fermi paradox. In her travels, Leela perceives a staggering variety of localized realities. She observes planets entirely populated by primitive flora and fauna. She interacts with planets hosting highly advanced humanoid civilizations.
But crucially, she notes that she traveled to countless planets that appeared to normal physical perception as nothing more than barren, dead rocks, yet were actually teeming with life existing on a higher, subtle frequency.
So the life is there, it's just vibrating at a rate our physical instruments can't catch.
Consider the trajectory of evolution. A civilization millions of years older than ours wouldn't merely iterate on their microchips or build faster combustion engines. The text implies they would evolve their fundamental state of being.
Highly advanced entities would likely transcend dense, three-dimensional biological matter entirely. They might exist as coherent light bodies or as pure energetic frequencies operating in higher dimensional spaces.
This completely reframes our astronomical observations. If a three-dimensional human civilization, using a three-dimensional optical telescope, looks directly at a planet inhabited by a five-dimensional civilization of pure energetic consciousness,
The telescope will register absolute zero. It will see a barren rock. We are literally not tuned to their existential frequency. The aliens are not ignoring us. The universe is likely deafeningly loud, but we are the ant, stubbornly searching for pheromones in a Wi-Fi field.
Our instruments are technologically complex, but dimensionally primitive.
We're using a ruler to measure a radio wave. It makes perfect sense. But the source material doesn't just leave us with the realization that we are dimensionally deaf. It provides one final, ultimate twist to the alien question. And it centers on our own relentless, almost irrational biological imperative to leave this planet.
Why are we so obsessed with the stars? Why do we spend immense resources to put rovers on Mars and design generation ships? The text argues this isn't just scientific curiosity. It is the cosmic cycle acting through our DNA.
It is the biological imperative of the Vishwarupa preparing to expand its footprint, extrapolate our current trajectory. Fast forward 1,000 years or 10,000 years. Humanity survives its technological adolescence. We master interstellar propulsion.
We arrive at dead, barren exoplanets and distant star systems.
We deploy terraforming technology. We artificially thicken atmospheres. We seed oceans with genetically engineered algae. We introduce complex biological ecosystems. We literally become the architects of new planetary biospheres.
We fulfill the role of the creator deities described in our own ancient myths.
Exactly. And when that engineered biological life eventually evolves, and we descend from the sky in our advanced glowing ships to observe the ecosystems we created, we will be the ancient aliens. We are the very extraterrestrials we have been desperately searching the skies for.
The Fermi paradox isn't a depressing confirmation of our isolation. It is a mirror reflecting our own ultimate destiny in the cosmic loop. We are currently in the larval stage of becoming the cosmic ancestors.
It forces a complete recalibration of how we view our place in the universe. We stare into the void looking for saviors to come down or threats to conquer us, entirely blind to the reality that we are observing our own future role in the grand cyclical play of the cosmos.
It is an incredibly powerful paradigm shift. Let's take a breath and look at the sheer scale of the journey we've taken today.
Yeah, let's recap. We started by examining the violent astrophysics of black holes and white holes, only to find their exact energetic counterparts mapped within the human chakra system. The Muladhara absorbing and contracting, the Sahasrara emitting and expanding.
We dissected the mathematical terror of the singularity, where the metric of space-time shatters, and recognized it not as a broken equation, but as the spiritual reality of Purnam, the infinite, unmanifested wholeness that gives birth to the math in the first place.
We tackled the black hole information paradox, finding that Leonard Susskind's holographic principle perfectly mirrors the ancient mechanics of the Akashic records, where the 3D physical universe is merely a projection of 2D karmic data conserved on a cosmic boundary.
We challenge the materialistic assumption that the biological brain manufactures consciousness, exploring the profound alternative that the brain acts as a prism, restricting and filtering a pre-existing universal field of consciousness into a localized human experience.
We looked at the dark, invisible 95% of the cosmos, dark matter and dark energy, and reframed those scientific placeholders as the connective tissue and the vital pranic breath of the Vishwarupa, the living cosmic giant.
We analyze the arrow of time and the tyranny of entropy, revealing how ancient mystics, operating from the no-mind state, could access the holographic data field to enact localized time reversal and negate thermodynamic decay.
And finally, we solved the silence of the Fermi paradox, realizing that the universe is teeming with life operating on frequencies our telescopes cannot yet perceive, and that our ultimate evolutionary destiny is to become the ancient aliens, seeding the next cycle of the cosmos.
The synthesis of these two seemingly disparate fields, cutting-edge physics and ancient mysticism, leaves us with a reality that is far stranger and far more beautiful than either discipline alone suggests. And as we conclude this analysis, I want to direct a final thought to you, the listener. We have spent this time conceptually traveling across the event horizons of black holes and the higher dimensional realms of ancient mystics. But I want you to internalize the functional mechanics of what we have discussed regarding consciousness.
Yeah, think about this.
If every physical structure in this universe, from the crushing singularity to the expanding dark energy, is merely a localized manifestation of one unified, underlying field of consciousness,
And your biological brain is currently acting as a prism, capturing and experiencing a localized sliver of that exact same universal consciousness field,
then the separation between observer and observed is an illusion. When you walk outside tonight and look up at the vast expanse of the night sky, it is not you, the isolated biological ego, looking out at a cold, distant universe. It is the universe, peering through the localized lens of your eyes, looking back at itself. You are the cosmos experiencing self-awareness. Consider the magnitude of that reality the next time you feel small.
the universe looking through your eyes to look back at itself. That is the only place to leave this. Thank you for joining us on this incredible deep dive. Keep questioning the paradigms, keep refining your prism, and remember that the answers we seek in the furthest reaches of deep space might already be encoded within the observer. Until next time.